Okay, everyone, by my watch, it is time to get started. So I'd like to take a second and welcome everyone to our panel discussion on a return to travel. As vaccine distribution continues to expand, the tide is turning on the pandemic. And while dream travelers have been driving web traffic to all the major sites for months, those same individuals will be planning real adventures before we know it. Tonight, we will take a look at all aspects of the travel retail ecosystem, examining the adaptive responses being made today and how those trends will shape future customer experiences. Before we get started, I have a few announcements to make. First, thank you to our event sponsor, Miller Zell. And as always, thank you to our title sponsors, MDI Worldwide, Principal, and Retail One. You all make discussions like these possible. Design teams, there is still time before the March 31st deadline to submit your work to the Institute's 50th International Design Competition. Projects opened from January 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2020 are eligible. Membership is still free through the end of May, so visit retaildesigninstitute.org and sign up today. If you are already a member, we'd love to spotlight you or your company in our monthly newsletter. So please share any big news or store openings with us via email at atlantasoutheast@retaildesigninstitute.org. I know that's a mouthful. Finally, we will be opening this session up for questions at the end of the discussion. Please submit any questions you may have via the Q&A panel found at the bottom of your Zoom window. We've enabled upvoting and commenting as well. With that, I would like to introduce tonight's moderator, Colleen Bentley. Colleen is the owner and founder of WDW Park Planners, a Disney concierge planning service. Having grown up traveling to Walt Disney World often, she cultivated a passion for the details that go into making the experience extra magical. After several more trips as an adult, she saw an opportunity to make traveling to the most magical place on earth stress-free and enables her customers to focus on what matters most, making memories. To do so, she leans on a business degree from the University of Notre Dame, years in both advertising and financial planning, and over 5 years as a Pure Barre instructor. With that, I will hand it over to Colleen.
Great. Thank you so much, Catherine. I'm so excited to be here and just honored to be around these wonderful panelists that we have today. So it's going to be a great discussion. I think we have a really wide variety of backgrounds and experiences. So I think the discussions are going to be wonderful tonight. And I love that this panel is very focused on the future of travel and what's in store. So hopefully all of you who are tuning in are really feeling the positivity and optimism that we are as well about the future of travel and what's in store. So with that being said, let's jump into our first question. This first question is going to be for all of the panelists. And panelists, as a reminder, if you don't mind introducing yourself quickly before you answer, that would be great. So with that, our first question is, the coronavirus pandemic has been shaping our behaviors and environment for a year now. So what industry changes or key learnings have impacted your sector of the travel ecosystem? So we will start with Brian first.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for that, Colleen. My name is Brian Hauser, and I am head of PIP and Plan Review for IHG Hotels and Resorts here in Atlanta, and I am glad to be here, part of the discussion. But just to respond to that first question, you know, for the hospitality industry and design and construction, I think that the first big impact, you know, and change has resulted in remote working, as most of us are working from our homes right now. That impacted hotel business and occupancy dramatically. Although, you know, we did find new ways to possibly generate business by bringing people into hotels to have safe havens. You know, if they needed a safe place to work, they knew they could come to a room and understand and feel comfortable with the cleanliness of it. But then also a big change was all of the F&B, all of the food and beverage outlets in the hotels. How can we quickly change and provide safe food and beverage service to all of the hotel guests, whether it be through a sundry shop at the check-in desk, or if it's a full-scale restaurant that now has to deliver sealed meals to your door. So it's been quite a change, and it was quite a quick switch that we had to go through last March.
And do you think that those will be more short-term changes or potentially permanent?
I think that a lot of it's going to be, there's some great learnings and impacts that I think that'll be permanent. I think that you'll continue to see great market options in hotel lobbies that allow you the flexibility to pick up a snack or meal, a drink, under your own comfort. But then also, I think that restaurants will also maintain that type of an option. Room service has always been a part of the business, but I think that the way that room service is delivered will probably always be a little bit different from now on.
Great. Well, thank you. Aaron, you are up next.
Okay. Hey, Colleen. Thank you. So I'm Aaron Bonham. I am I'm responsible for merchandising and visual at Paradies Lagardère. So we're travel retail in airports. Okay, so for your question, what changed in the industry from the pandemic? So look, we take our cues, from a couple places. One, obviously, our customer, which largely went away when travel stopped, and we also look, at street retail. What are they doing to make sure their customers are safe and have what they need? So, to begin with, we obviously try to make customers comfortable in the space, right? We put up plexiglass, we put stickers on the floor for social distancing. We made sure our employees had masks on at all times. And then, we offered the merchandise that the customer was looking for when travel initially started back, right? So masks, sanitized wipes, hand sanitizer, those sorts of things. The other piece of it is really, it just expedited what we were already seeing, which was a change to self-checkout and digital checkout, right? So, and you've probably seen this on the street as well. So more self-checkout available, customers feel, empowered by, only handling their product, plus the speed. And that's very important in the airports as well. And then we've also seen sort of different technologies like Amazon to go, where you literally walk into a store, grab your stuff, and it hits your credit card and you walk out. We've introduced something called MishiPay, which is a QR code on your phone, and very similar. As you go through the store, you scan the items that you want, place them in a bag, and it charges your credit card for your purchases, and you don't have to stop at a self-checkout or a cash wrap. And so those are some of the changes we've seen since the pandemic started.
Yeah, and that's pretty similar to what Disney's been doing too. Disney already, was very tech forward, which is great. What they had before the pandemic even hit was this thing called magic bands, which you've maybe heard of, but it's a band you wear on your wrist, and basically it does everything for you. So it lets you get into the parks, into your hotel room. You can put a credit card attached to it and do everything as touchless as possible. But now what Disney is doing is they're trying to transition into making that a mobile thing. So you use your smart device instead of using the magic bands. So it'll be interesting to see how they start to test that out over the next few months. But, they're heading in the same direction, which I think most people are these days.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I'm guessing you think a lot of those are going to be permanent changes then?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things I talked about to begin with, the plexiglass, the social distancing stickers, I think those things will probably not be permanent. At least that's the hope. Masks certainly hopefully that wouldn't be permanent. But the things that, the technology, which was already moving that way, this just expedited it. Certainly, I think that's just going to continue to grow.
Definitely. Great. Well, thank you. Next, we have Al, if you don't mind, again, introducing yourself quickly first.
Hey, Colleen. Hey, everybody. My name is Al Gunfarp. I'm a flight attendant for Delta Airlines, and I've been flying for almost 35 years. And the airline industry has really turned upside down since the pandemic started. You know, we had a pretty elaborate service on the airplane for our customers in first class going to international destinations, and now it's pretty minimal. We had the Mayo Clinic come on board and study our service, and they cut it down to where we have minimal points of contact with our customers, which is kind of strange because we're customer service oriented, but yet we have to be safe. And for domestic flights, we went from having a full beverage service to just we give everybody a bag with water, chips, Biscoff cookies, and a towelette. And it's kind of frustrating because you want to give good service, but yet we have protocols to go by. And you know, we have to wear a mask, we have to wear gloves. We can't pour wine in somebody's glass. We have to take the glass from them. So there's a lot of differences. And slowly but surely, things are coming back. Passengers are coming back. They're adding more services, more destinations, more flights. So I'm very optimistic that maybe this time next year, it'll be pretty much back to normal. And I think most of the changes are temporary. Maybe a few might stay, but it's pretty temporary, but we're getting better.
Great. Yeah. I mean, it really is that human element that makes that so special and which brings, you know, your clients and guests back, same as Disney too. It's, you know, it's really challenging interacting with the cast members at Disney who a lot of them initially were wearing masks and shields. So you get that really muffled, you know, voice. So it's, you know, even harder to connect and just talk and even, you know, hear when they're reading off the menu or whatever it is. It was just really, it's been challenging. So I can't imagine for you guys too.
And you know, I do a lot of long flights, you know, to Europe and South America, and passengers would come to the back and talk to us in the galley, and you know, that's fun. But now they can't do that. You know, they only groups of two, and that they have to go back to their seats. So we're missing out on a lot of personal interaction.
Yeah.
So I'll be glad when that comes back.
Yeah, I was going to say it's probably not as enjoyable for you then. You feel a little isolated. It cuts that off quite a bit.
It's very boring.
Long flights. Great. Well, thank you, Al. And last but not least, we have Nancy. And again, if you can introduce yourself quickly.
Yes, great. Hi, I'm Nancy Payne. I'm on the planning and insights team at TPN, a creative commerce agency. So we work on a slew of brands like Cricket Wireless, Medline, Clorox, Bimbo Bakeries, and a whole other array of brands. But I'm, you know, coming at it from sort of the consumer lens, which is my role in my day-to-day job. And the biggest thing that I'd say that's affected travel, you know, obviously is consumer behavior in general. But the biggest thing, which all three of the other panelists touched on, is this acceleration of trends that were already kind of coming. You know, it was trends that were being talked about going into 2020, essentially just got shoved into reality, whether retailers or customers or online platforms were ready for it. So that acceleration, you know, went from everything like retail technology to such as click and collect or BOPIS or app capabilities, to consumer behaviors like self-care, online shopping, work from home, obviously. A lot of those things that were on the horizon just sort of really got a microscope on them in terms of how do retailers respond, how do retailers like Targets and Walmarts and also convenience stores and dollar sections, how are all of them responding to COVID, and what's that consumer interaction like? And I would say one of the more kind of surprising things that happened is that the traveling, both from a day-to-day perspective and from a travel perspective, shrunk. So that meant the everyday shopping kind of was within a 5-mile radius. People found ways to make a one-stop shop more possible, which led to things like Walmart and Target and Dollar General kind of widening their variety of intel and inventory. And then with travel, domestic obviously boomed. Airbnb, it was kind of like travel was within a certain driving radius. Rental car services went up. And in general, there was just kind of this increased closeness in terms of location, which I thought was really interesting. And so I'd say that was a huge thing, as well as flexibility, which Brian talked about, just finding ways to be flexible, both as a customer and as a brand and as a retailer, any way that you could be flexible, the better.
Yeah, definitely agree with the flexibility. Business wise, personally, I think everyone's had to be really flexible and, kind of just roll with the punches as they happen. So, well, thank you, Nancy. So now we are going to jump in. Brian, we have some questions for you. So to kick it off, first question is, what design choices are being made now from a form and materiality perspective that speak directly to customer psychology and then remove that barrier to travel?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that immediately kind of plays into what Nancy was just talking about in terms of things that were already underway that are getting accelerated. And I would say that the first thing is that it was already a big movement in hospitality to really focus on clean quality sleep, really focus on those guest rooms. And when you think about the materials, there was already a move towards white quartz countertops. The days of the multicolor granite countertops were going away. There was a green Ubatuba granite that was popular back in the 90s. And things like that are kind of going towards the way of just a clean, non-porous, solid, tight quartz countertop, so the guest feels comfortable that they're walking into a clean space. So I think you'll start to notice that even the showers and the surrounds around the tubs, you'll find larger tiles, less grout. Because how many times have you gone into a hotel room with nasty grout in the bathroom there? So trying to go to things that can last longer and really play with the psychology of the guest. And then also in the guest room, it's more of a move towards minimalism. You won't go into hotel spaces as much and see a lot of tchotchkes and accessories hanging around. It's really about clean horizontal surfaces. You'll start to see things like, instead of nightstands with drawers that are closed, more open cubbies or shelves, so the guests can feel comfortable that, yeah, it's reasonable that housekeeping touched all of the surfaces that I'm touching. So really that move towards, making you feel psychologically safe in a guest room, because the guest room is where you're most vulnerable. That's where you take off all of your personal protective equipment, right? That's where you don't have your mask, you don't have any of your protection. So really focusing on that. But then I think also thinking about flexibility of the lobby space. No one really wants to gather in large groups in the lobby anymore. So as we plan out these lobbies and spaces, how do you create little small multiple nooks of space where people are comfortable? You have some soft seating, you have a booth, you have a banquette, you have a community table where people can kind of spread out and have their own social distancing, and trying to create that in a way that prevents you from having to have kind of a maze of plexiglass to separate everybody. So you'll see, so that was something that was already happening in restaurants. There was kind of the Starbucks push to kind of create these comfortable spaces where you can do your own thing, but it really just went into hyperdrive. So I think those are two big things that are taking place in terms of the material and the physical space. And then also, like Aaron said, really getting into how can you check into your room with a touchless check-in system, a self-check-in kiosk. Also, through your phone, not having a key to actually get into your guest room, using your phone in a code on your phone to open up your guest room door. So lots of great technology that was already underway that really went into hyperdrive.
Yeah, that's so interesting what you were saying about just the countertops too. That's something I would never think of that does make such a huge difference in terms of, you know, what your brain thinks is clean and, you know, minimalistic in that way. At Disney, you know, again, it's just making your brain think it's cleaner maybe than it actually is, but they would wrap like the remotes or the high touch surfaces in like the saran wrap or plastic wrap. So that was something they've been doing. You know, whether or not that'll continue, I'm not really sure, but I think it's more of a mental thing than anything else of just, okay, like we know it was properly sanitized and, you know, taken care of with proper measures. But I was going to say, you know, about the human interaction element. I know that we touched on a little bit before too, you know, with these small nooks and areas, you know, do you think that's going to be enough, or do you think it will ever go back to where there is more of a common space, or do you think this is kind of the future now of that Starbucks example you used in terms of the layout for lobbies moving forward?
I think it is the way of the future, because it's just, we're in a world now where we want choice, and we don't want to be told that we have to sit together, right? And we don't want to be told how many people can sit in the space. So I think that flexible those options are going to stay with us, because it makes people want to engage, because we have actually really found that when you don't create that, you find that people would rather not gather if they're not going to be comfortable around in that setting. So you end up with empty lobbies if they're not really designed in a way that allow for people to work it out themselves. So I think the key is to really have multiple types of seating.
Great. On a different note, another question we had was, do you think that the pandemic really slowed growth in construction of like new locations for you, or, you know, how was that affected timing wise?
Yeah, absolutely. The construction rate did slow down, especially for new construction. There are a lot of conversion projects going on right now as hotels continue to grow. And we're really looking at existing properties and converting them to our brands. It is a lot harder to find banks that are willing to give construction loans right now for new builds. And you can imagine a lot of banks are not really interested in investing in hotels that require people to travel to them in the middle of a pandemic. So it's definitely, we've definitely seen that slow in growth, but it's really actually been interesting to see some of the franchisees that own the hotels, depending on, you know, their standing. Some of them have said, you know what, this is a slow time and it's the perfect time to renovate my hotel and be ready with a great new product when it's over. So it's a mix. You know, some hotels have gone dormant and some have really kicked into gear to get ready for when we come out of this.
Yeah, interesting. I know Disney stopped development of a few new properties that were supposed to come this year, next year, which was unfortunate. But then exactly what you just said, they've started renovating quite a few of the major resorts on property. Disney's 50th anniversary is October 1st. So they're kind of gearing up for the big anniversary. But, you know, that's interesting that you say that. The renovation side, that's been, you know, quite the case at Disney. We keep hearing of new renovations that are underway. So really interesting to hear that. So thank you. Great. Well, are going to move on to Aaron now. So Aaron, we have a few questions for you. The first one, how has the change in traveler demographics, meaning leisure versus business, shaped both your merchandising and then the layout and design outlook, short-term and long-term?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, it's interesting. We you know, we really broke it down into 4 segments of travelers. So if you think about it, there's a leisure traveler that's going on vacation. They've got a certain mindset. It's almost like we're going to treat ourselves, you know, through the whole journey, including at the airport. There's a leisure traveler that is traveling for the need of their family or the need of something, right? To go move a daughter into college or help, you know, an elderly parent or something like that. That's still a leisure traveler, but again, their mindset's a bit different as they go through the airport. There's a traditional business traveler, which we'll talk a little bit about. They have not come back yet. So I encourage all of you to travel as soon as possible. And then there's the international traveler, which again is a very different traveler when they enter our stores. And so, obviously the business traveler and the international traveler have pretty much gone away. I mean, we're starting to see slight business travel come back, but again, it's very, very limited at this point. The international traveler, as you guys all know, is not really returning at all. The leisure traveler is picking up tremendously, right? And again, it's very dependent on the locations, what states are open. So we've seen, our merchandising has changed in a couple ways. One, the leisure traveler does act a bit differently than the business traveler. Business traveler tends to buy, more water, healthier snacks in general, less novelty stuff like T-shirts with the city's name, things of that nature. The leisure traveler, especially the vacationer, they're generally there to treat themselves. They're going to go for the sweets and the salty snacks. They're going to go for carbonated beverages, and they're definitely going to pick up souvenirs from their trip, right? So if they're in Florida, they're going to pick up a Florida tea, so forth and so on. The other thing that we've seen, and Al talked a little bit about it, is we definitely saw a shift towards convenience, beverages, snacks, and grab and go. And really two components to that. One is airport restaurants were slower to open than airport retail. And so there weren't a lot of options for the traveler to get food inside the airport. Number two is, as Al said, the services on the airlines have drastically reduced, right? And so the traveler knows, hey, I'm not going to get drink service. I'm not going to get a snack. And that goes generally all the way through first class. And so we've seen customers pick up more food as they get on the plane. And I would say partly, and Al could probably speak to this, partly because that's also an excuse to put your mask down for a little bit while you're on the plane, right? If you've got a snack, if you got a drink or a snack, you get a little bit of a break from your mask. So we definitely have seen the increase there. As far as layout, we've definitely shifted our layouts to grow space in those categories. And again, this goes back to the technology thing. We already saw a shift in publications specifically. So magazines have downtrended, and we started the process of shifting that space to snacks and beverages. Again, this just expedited that tremendously, right? Gave us the opportunity to really go at this much faster, in a much faster way. And so we've seen that, and we think that will continue on for the long term.
Do you think there's any differences in the response between airports, restaurants, and hospitality? Have you seen anything like that, or has it been pretty similar across the board?
You mean by airport?
Mm-hmm.
It's been fairly similar across the board. Yeah, I would say we've seen pretty similar results across all locations. Yeah. I mean, we obviously see a little bit different when you think about real resort type destinations like Florida. You certainly get a different, but we were getting a different customer there anyways, even before the pandemic.
Yeah, great. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Erin. We're going to jump to Al now. So Al, your first question, you have a really unique perspective in your role because you are at the intersection of the travel ecosystem with so many touch points as a professional and as a consumer. So, what are some of the most notable responses, both domestically and internationally, that you're seeing in airports, restaurants, and hospitality?
Well, starting out in the airports, like Erin said, at first everything was closed. Nothing was open, no shops, uh, a lot of the bathrooms aren't even open. But slowly but surely, everything's coming back. And, there's no menus. None of the restaurants use menus anymore. You have to scan it on your phone, which I think that's going to be here to stay. And then, when you get off our flights, we go to the hotels, and the hotels are completely different now. Only one person at the counter at a time. And, there's just nobody there. There's nobody in the lobby. There's nobody hanging out. There's no much street traffic. And internationally, it's even more prevalent that there's no one there. It's shocking that there's no one on the streets. There's no one in the hotels, no one on the airplanes, but it's coming back. So it's looking better.
Yeah, interesting what you say about the lobby. I've been down to Disney. They reopened Disney World in Florida back in July, and I've been down pretty much every few weeks since then. But the lobbies are what is most striking to me when you walk into the resort, and it's just like dead there, and even minimal employees. It's a very eerie feeling almost, and it started to get a little bit better, but it feels off. And usually that's the time when you're like arriving to your vacation and you're feeling so excited, and you're welcomed by all the cast members and whatnot. But so it's definitely a different feeling, emotionally, especially for vacations and for vacationers going to Disney, which is such a big magical thing, for families. So have you, really, as people are returning to travel, are you seeing consumers' behaviors change? And, I know you mentioned it a little bit before, and again, are there differences domestically versus internationally in like their actual behaviors? And do you think that'll be kind of a new normal moving forward?
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of new first-time flyers because the airfares to the leisure destinations are fairly reasonable. So we have a lot of first-time flyers going to the islands, Hawaii, Florida, and we have a lot of the business travel is not there. There's very little business travel. International is even worse. But I think a couple of months ago, coming back from Paris, we had 4 people on the airplane, and that makes for you're not going to make money with 4 people. But it's getting better. It's just it's going to take some time, and wearing the mask on the airplane. At first, people wouldn't do it, and now everybody, it's kind of second nature. They have it on. Everybody follows the rules now, which is good.
That is good. Yeah, it's been interesting when we fly. People were not following the mask rules quite as much, and they were, trying to eat and drink to make it look like they were, to keep their mask down a little bit longer. And I've noticed the strictness and the enforcement has gotten much better with that, which I appreciate. So, that's nice to see and makes everybody else feel better. But it is interesting to see how that's kind of evolved a bit.
For sure.
I don't envy you for having to enforce that. That's a little bit tough too. So, but on a different note, I was curious, with Delta in general, knowing there was a little bit of a lull in the passengers, how have they used that time? Have they done anything to kind of improve customer experiences or anything on that front? Just knowing that it's been a little bit of a quieter year for them overall.
Yes, in fact, in Los Angeles and Seattle and New York LaGuardia, they put most of the service in one little terminal, and they're building new terminals because there's not much traffic. So they're using that time to improve all the stations, and they're coming up with technology for the Wi-Fi on board the airplane, so it's a little faster and a little more cooperative, if you will. But they've done really well at managing the lull in traffic to building and improving the terminals.
Yeah, that's great. And then do you think, customers who are returning to fly, like what are their expectations coming back? Have you noticed a change in that, or are there higher expectations for things? What have you seen from that?
Well, I think it was such a shock, when they would get on the airplane, and a lot of times people say, "Can we get some coffee?" No, all we have is water, and that's tough to tell people they have water for a 4-hour flight. But we're slowly but surely introducing, sodas, more snacks offerings. So it's going to get better. It's going to be a more pleasant experience than it has been the past year.
Yeah. Have you had any like difficult experiences with clients or with guests that are flying at all, or any incidents like that?
No, I wish I had a good story for you, but it's
I thought I'd ask.
it's kind of like we're all in this together thing. And if I see somebody without a mask on, I'll just say, I don't like wearing it either, but it's not, it's a small thing to do. It's not much, but everybody is pretty much pitching in and doing their part, at least on my end of the, with the customers and the flight attendant crew and the pilots and the gate agents and everything.
Yeah, that's good to hear. You don't want those incidents. I've seen only probably a few. I can maybe count on one hand at Disney where it's been like an issue, because think of the quantity of guests that are in the parks, and they have, special teams of cast members that are responsible for the enforcement of, masks and all the new rules and procedures and things. And, considering how much we've been down there, and how much capacities, increased and how many more people are coming, I'm surprised I haven't seen more of that. But I think it is that mentality of we're all in this together. If we all keep our masks on, it keeps the parks open, it keeps us traveling and flying. So,
for us, it's easier to diffuse a customer issue, rather than a health issue. If a medical emergency happens on board, that's when it's really tricky. But we're trained to help diffuse customer situations, and we're also trained to help medical emergencies. So that's that helps.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you. That was great. And last we have Nancy. So Nancy, we're going to jump in with your first question. And I know you've touched on a little bit of this already, but what are some of the key shopper marketing trends that you've seen, emerging in retail, hospitality, food, aviation, automotive, all the industries? What have you really seen emerging, across the board?
Yeah. Well, Brian, Alan, Aaron all did a great job of talking about that. And there is so much, and there has been so much that's happened in terms of trends and how it's affected the consumer. So I kind of have bucketed it out into 3 themes. And I have it as flexibility, which we talked a little bit about, transparency, and anxiety, which is kind of a loaded one. But Aaron, what you were saying in terms of the, multiple kinds of travelers, what I thought was really interesting about that is that, one person can be all 4 of those travelers, and usually is, right? So I can be a vacation leisure traveler, and then a month later, I'm a need leisure travel, and then 2 months later, an international traveler, hopefully in the coming months, right? But, in terms of all these themes, there's multiple layers to each of them. So with flexibility, that can mean different things at different times. So, for example, the number of households that are being purchased, homeowners, is at kind of an all-time high. So that's one side of it. But also there's this huge rise in van living and, living on the open road, and kind of reprioritizing to focus on nature and less of an urban lifestyle. So there's kind of 2 things happening, which I think is really interesting, that flexibility can mean one thing for one person and something else for another. And flexibility can also mean, when it comes to travel, this expectation from airlines to be flexible, with no change fees, or, just more of a kind of understanding and empathy to changing travel plans, as well as I kind of talked about car rentals, but I thought that's been interesting throughout this whole period. And that car rental business is kind of expected to continue, because people who, maybe have cars but don't want to add a ton of miles on them will use them. So there are these kind of industries that are doing well, including convenience stores. So there's a ton of examples of flexibility that I think we've talked about. Transparency, Brian talked about it. a lot in terms of cleanliness. That's, kind of an obvious one that people are going to continue to want. 86% of consumers say cleanliness is very important when they think about accommodations for travel. So that can mean something different for everyone, but that comfort and safety is one form of transparency. And then another huge one is that conscious consumerism, the need for sustainability and activism from brands and retailers and travel agencies. That's going to be a consideration for a large chunk of shoppers that comes with transparency from brands. And I think there's a really kind of exciting opportunity for brands to really interact in a positive way and make customers feel secure in every way, and make customers feel like they're making a positive impact at the same time. So that's kind of that piece. And then the last piece is anxiety, which, I think COVID has shined a light on anxiety in a really interesting and powerful way. And I think it's also kind of naturally brought up the negative side of anxiety with all this isolation that Al has talked about, the lack of human interaction that's happened, kind of increased irritability that might continue to happen. But there's also that positive side of anxiety, which comes with eagerness and optimism. And thankfully, some of our sources have shown that optimism in general is expected to increase. 78% of US consumers believe the future will be better in the next 5 to 10 years. And that's great, and I think that's something to really lean into as we look forward, because there is this eagerness to find a balance of connection, whether it's reuniting with family members or experiencing a new destination that they might not have been able to go to. So it's really this sort of finding the balance of that eagerness and acknowledging some of that irritability and nervousness that's going to come as we continue to open up, finding that balance. And I think that's another opportunity for spaces and travel accommodations and brands can really make a positive impact. So.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of on that note, what pandemic trends, for example, like staycations, road trips, all of those things that have become kind of the new normal this last year, do you think those are going to continue? Is that sustainable? Or, what do you think will happen to those new trends that have come out?
Yeah, so I think that it will continue. But I also think, it kind of depends on the person, obviously. If you have been someone who hasn't really ventured out, going to a staycation in your own city or in your own town or a couple hours away will be more in your wheelhouse in the next year. But if you get vaccinated and you feel comfortable with all of the precautions that all these travel services are doing, you might kind of expand that bubble. But I do think that a positive out of this is that it's made people appreciate where they live or where they're from. More people are moving back to where they're from, which I think I'll be curious to see if people are kind of like, actually, wait, no, I miss where I was living before, or, actually this works for me. So I think that in the next 2 years, we'll continue to see a lot of that localization happening. And, but right alongside it will be this big need to travel further. One thing that has happened is people are planning ahead. So if it's not happening now, they're planning ahead. The one thing that kept happening is a lot of people didn't fully cancel their travel plans. They've just pushed them ahead. So I think it's a combination. Yes, people are staying close still, but I think people are broadening their bubble and are moving out and finding new places too.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting to see that dynamic, either people moving home locally, like you said, or, trying a new city, taking this opportunity like, hey, we can work from anywhere. Why not pick up and move now? Even if it is just temporary. But, it's kind of unbelievable how the last year has allowed like so many major life changes like that to take place. So, well, great. Well, thank you, Nancy. That was awesome.
Yeah. Colleen, I actually have a question for you. We talked about a lot of these trends, both from the travel perspective and the consumer perspective. How have these trends impacted the Disney traveler, and what responses have you and the Disney ecosystem have been implemented to address these needs? You kind of touched on it, but would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. It's a great question. And we did talk a little bit about it already, but, honestly, I think traveling to Disney, as with any other place, is really never going to be the same as it was pre-pandemic. And that's not necessarily in a bad way. I just think it's going to be different. So for the Disney traveler, we've, used this word flexibility. So when I was, thinking about this, that was the word that kept coming to mind, is like, not just for Disney travelers, but everybody. We've had to be so flexible this last year. But for Disney specifically, it's been interesting, whether it's, a family who's been to Disney before, but hasn't been since the pandemic hit, or if it's a first-time family, that has certain expectations or, of what their Disney trip is going to look like. They've had to be flexible with all of the changes going on. For Disney World, specifically, so in Florida, things have been changing so quickly. The joke is kind of like, okay, what news are we going to get today that something's different, or whether it's something closing, reopening, just, news of construction, renovations, all the things. It's just been pretty nonstop. So change has really been the constant through all of this. So, in addition to travelers needing to be flexible, at WDW Park Planners, we've obviously had to be really flexible too. But more importantly, we've had to manage all of those changes for our clients. So that's been, the bigger component. And it's kind of funny now being on the other side of things over the last year. The pandemic actually was great for our business. It just, added even more value to what we were already doing for our clients. We're a concierge service that really takes care of everything. The two words that I hear most frequently when someone is talking about planning a trip to Disney is that it's stressful and overwhelming. And if you've been to Disney or planned a trip before, you can probably relate to that, because it's a lot of work and you have to do it far in advance, which I always joke, like, I get why people hate Disney. If you just show up and you haven't done any of the work, yeah, it's not going to be very magical. You're not going to be able to get into the restaurants. You're not going to be able to do the things you want. You're going to be waiting in lines. So, that work needs to be done in advance. But, what we've done through the pandemic is had to, evolve a little bit more to focus on navigating all the changes for our clients that are happening and keeping them up to date. So they know, like, they are in good hands, where we are just handling all of, the stress of the changes that have been happening. So in terms of creative solutions, though, I think it's interesting. With Disney, I think we all knew and expected that Disney would do an amazing job in terms of creating a safe space. Disney was called like the Disney bubble before the pandemic, but even more now, I think it's even more appropriate that it is a Disney bubble. They, Disney World reopened in July, and, they did everything they could to keep the parks open. And that meant creating a safe space, and making their guests and cast members feel as safe as possible. So we knew they would do that. And, Disney has knocked it out of the park. And it's, been great, knock on wood. But I think the trickier part for Disney was, something a little more challenging, was how to provide that magical experience still. So a lot of the extra experiences that Disney provides are not open and not available, or they're different. So like all of the rides and attractions are open, But the difference with Disney and just another theme park is that it's all the extra stuff that makes the experience really magical. So the parades, the fireworks, the characters, like all of that is what goes into making Disney that really happy, magical place. And it's not just a place you're going to ride all the rides and do all those things. So the challenge for Disney was really, how do we still make it feel magical, even though we're missing a lot of these major elements? And Disney was creative about it and came up with some great solutions. And that's part of what we've had to do too for our clients is, understanding those changes and incorporating that into our clients' itineraries. So we're still giving them that magical experience that they would want and expect from going to Disney. So, it's that nostalgia that Disney, uses to get people to come back, to get guests to come back to the parks. And the magic is like the root of that. So, for example, Disney got rid of parades. So there used to be like one parade a day, every day at the Magic Kingdom, and people would line up an hour in advance to get their spot so they could see it. And now that that's gone, Disney's creative solution to that was that they've come up with what they call cavalcades. So they're mini parades. They run kind of frequently throughout the day at all 4 parks. They're different at each of the parks. There's different characters, but it's just 1 or 2 floats. And they come through, there's no schedule. So, the spontaneity adds a little bit of magic to the experience too. You're getting to see a lot of characters, but for us, again, helping our clients is, why I've had to be down in the parks so much. And I love going down, but, part of what we do in our bread and butter is being really good and knowing all the ins and outs and figuring out like what the tricks are and being able to, kind of provide that magical touch and, give those insights to our clients so they can, have the most magical experience possible. So, so that's a little bit about, what Disney's done, just one example, but yeah, I mean, it's been interesting to watch things evolve. And I know, like I said, changes come every day. We keep finding out new things. So, change is going to be the constant for a long time, which is good. And like I mentioned before, it's the 50th anniversary of Disney World on October 1st this year. So I think Disney's kind of using that as their threshold to get back to a new normal. So it'll be interesting to see, what news we continue to get. Disney, will slowly trickle out the information to get people excited so they know what they're doing. But, it'll be an interesting year to see how everything unfolds.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, Colleen, and totally applicable to retail and brands across like a variety of categories, because I think, and Allie, you talked about this, just having to be stripped down to the bare bones of what you do. We've been seeing that a lot at retail is one of the biggest has been one of the biggest challenges. And I see a question in the chat about touching being a concern with self-service kiosks. And I think that, navigating those kinds of issues with, like if we're kind of having to scale back, how do we make the experience as comforting and exciting and inspirational as possible, is kind of going to continue to be a challenge. But I think it's been cool and inspiring to watch brands succeed in these creative solutions. So, and also to answer the question a little bit more directly, from my perspective, the question is, what is becoming the norm in terms of self-service kiosks and touching being a concern? I would just say that showing that you're cleaning those kiosks is going to be a huge thing, whether it's like some sort of stamp of cleanliness, or like this was cleaned 20 minutes ago by one of your reps. I would say is I don't think people are totally hesitant to touch things, but if there's an understanding like this has been cleaned, pairing with those hand sanitizers, that's the best I could say. But I kind of stole the question if anyone else wants to answer it.
Does anyone else want to jump in there too?
Well, like on the airplanes, we fog the airplanes before even we get on board. And that takes about 15, 20 minutes, but everything's clean. And people get on and try to, wipe everything down. It's already been cleaned. But everybody has their towelettes and their own procedure to do their own things to make themselves comfortable. And that's, I have my own rituals to do to make me comfortable on the airplane. So that's person by person.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Nancy. I think we've seen an uptick in self-service kiosks being used by the customer. I think they feel like they're in control. They can use hand sanitizer as soon as they're finished with that transaction. We haven't seen any hesitancy. In fact, if you go across retail, whether it's in airports or street retail, you see more and more self-service checkouts popping up. And so I think that's a sign that the customer has no concern with the self-service or the self-checkout.
And just to round it out, I agree. I think in hotels you see kind of a spectrum, a full spectrum of it. In more of the limited service hotels, I think it's really important what Aaron was saying, and Nancy, make sure you have that hand sanitizer there, and it's really clear that it's being maintained on a regular basis. But I would say that when you get to an upscale or luxury experience, if you're walking into an Intercontinental or a Kimpton hotel, that's where there may be a kiosk there, but there's actually someone to help you do it, right? That's when you kind of get into the customer service and kind of that personal touch that Al's talked about that really makes it magical, like Colleen was talking about. So it's like, how do you make it a magical experience? Imagine walking into a 5-star hotel and someone is there to help you through the kiosk experience. So that makes you feel a little bit better about the different price tag for that luxury brand.
Great. Well, we have a few other questions that have come in. So and to anyone who's viewing, if you'd like to submit a question, do that now. We have a few others, so we'll start with some of those, and we will do our best to get as many in as we can. But for the first question, and I'm opening this up to all the panelists, so feel free to just jump in here. But I liked this one. What was the biggest mistake you and your company made in reaction to the pandemic? As in, what will you definitely do differently if we have to go through this sort of thing again, which I really hope we don't. But if we do, what would you do differently? Did you make a mistake? How did you rectify that? So opening it up to anyone.
I can go first, Colleen. So I think, for us, we have a unique relationship with our airport partners. I think we would have partnered up more quickly with them to find solutions. So traditionally, right, their expectation of us is to have our retail stores, all of our retail stores open, from the beginning of the day, right, till the very last flight. And so when flights, went down to almost nothing, we had a wide range of responses to that, right? Some from the airports, which were completely wrong, which was you have to keep all your stores open regardless of the traffic. And some, frankly, our fault, which we said, hey, look, we're closing all our stores in these airports. We're not generating any revenue. We need to close all these stores. I don't think either was the right solution, right? So if you think about, there were very few flights, but there's a lot of employees in airports. There's, baggage handlers, TSA, airline personnel. And so we could have worked better with the airports to decide which store would we support, to make sure that there was an option for the folks that did have to travel, the first responders that were on, those first flights out, the airline associates that were coming in and needed to grab, a water on their way home or something like that. And so we could have done a better job with the airports early on to partner and come up with the solution.
Great. Anyone else?
I'll jump in on that one. I think I think one thing that I think that we would do really it's related. It's about partnerships and making sure, because I think when this first started, the thought or the hope was that it wouldn't be as long as it was. I think everybody was thinking it would be over a lot sooner than it was. So I think not letting ourselves kind of fall into that optimism. You kind of plan for the worst and, hope for the best. So I think that would just be a perspective change, and then partnering for that long-term support of our franchisees and the guests.
Great. Al, anything?
For the airlines, I think it was mostly internally with the crews. The flights would cancel, but you still had the crews that had to go home or get somewhere to take another plane, and pilots weren't matched up with the flight attendants, and there's a lot of internal issues that went on the first 2 months, but then they kind of pulled it together, and the system's running well now.
Mm-hmm. Great. So another question that came in was, how do you feel the overall pricing strategy of travel will be affected by this? Will it decrease to entice people back, or increase to make up for losses?
I'll jump in on that one. I think that it's really going to depend on the market. I think that you're going to see some of the larger markets when they open back up, some of our big cities, when New York opens back up, DC, San Francisco. I think that you're going to see probably some inflated pricing, but then we've got tertiary markets that I think that are really going to be trying to draw people to their location. So it's going to be market driven.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I think I would just add on to that. I mean, it's not just going to be purely the travel industry. There's external factors that will play in, right? So obviously, as more people go back to work and get on the roads, and gas, oil prices go up. I mean, the cost of goods are going to go up at the same time. We saw, obviously deflation when the pandemic hit, because cost of goods went down. So we'll see cost of goods go up. So I would anticipate that we would see prices at or above pre-pandemic rates when we get through this.
Nancy or Al?
I think it definitely depends on the market. Like I said earlier, we have a lot of leisure travel now, to the islands, Florida, and those fares are really reasonable. But the business travel and the business centers, I think that's going to probably go up, and then it'll come back down to normal. But it's just depends on the market completely.
Yeah, I think it's been interesting, during kind of the height of the pandemic, people were really shocked and kind of interested in some of those lower flight price points, car rental price points. And, now people are kind of realizing, those prices are those $40 flights aren't as easy to come by. So I can't really speak to, what the prices will be, but I do think there will be sort of a, in terms of anticipation from shoppers, I think people will be open to spending a little bit more because there's a craving for travel. But I also think that there will be a balance of people looking for more affordable options, whether it's camping outside of a city they haven't been before, or maybe an all-inclusive resort, which they might not have wanted to do in the past for whatever reason. So people just sort of changing their priorities and expectations, and price will definitely be a consideration factor, but it'll just depend on how they've been affected by the pandemic financially, and there is going to be a huge chunk of people who will probably have to hold off on larger expense travel. So it'll just depend on the person, but I think it'll range, and there'll definitely be a segment of people who are going to be willing to spend a little bit more. So
yeah, definitely. We have two more questions. So one is actually for Brian. The question is, Brian, what initiatives are underway to serve guests' needs as far as walking distance food, beverage, entertainment that meets their preferences and COVID considerations? So co-marketing with nearby community service providers that meet the desire to walk and dine outdoors, or off-property synergy as a full-service destination?
Okay, good question. There, and this also varies per location and market. I think that if it's a hotel that has a full service, already has a full service restaurant as a part of the hotel offering, there's certainly, that's where we're going to want to funnel that business, is to take advantage of that in-house market. And most of our properties do offer outdoor seating options as well. For the limited service hotels that don't offer a restaurant, though the staff members are always knowledgeable about nearby locations to guide people to, but there's not necessarily a partnership with like a Grubhub or a DoorDash, but those types of businesses are able to deliver to the hotel. So you do see those certain guests getting deliveries from those things, but for the most part, it's an operational training consideration to make sure that we can guide people to nearby restaurants when we don't have one on site.
Great. And we have one more question. We'll end on a positive note. So this person's asking, so as they've continued to shop and travel, the guest experience has suffered in airports and hotels. How do you expect this to improve? And, when do you think this will start to see a difference? And what kind of changes can we expect, looking ahead to the future?
I can start, Colleen. I think, look, certainly, I think everybody on this call would know, I mean, labor costs are the highest costs any company deals with. And as revenue was challenged, that's one of the areas that most companies, I know, Brian and Al certainly had to deal with in their businesses, was to cut labor. And that impacts the customer experience, right? When you have minimal guest touch points. And so obviously, as we start to recover, we would anticipate that the service will come back as we bring folks back into the business. But then I think it'll also help, what we talked about at the beginning, which is adding technology to the platforms, and you'll have a number of the travelers that will prefer to use the technology as they go through their journey, whether it's the kiosk checking in at the, with their ticket, or self-checkout in the stores, or, using your phone to enter your hotel room. And that will allow, the folks that want an actual face-to-face will have a better experience. So I think those two things will help improve, and we should see that over the course of the year.
Great.
Yep, I'll follow up with that. I totally agree. I think it'll be later in the year, because it is going to be, it's all about the labor, and it's all going to also follow the vaccination rate, right? And so there has to be that confidence that builds up, and once there's the confidence, then the business comes, and then there's the finances to bring all of the labor back. So it's going to be a little bit of a trickle, but it has been amazing. Just how many general managers and owners I've seen cleaning guest rooms and things like that, just because, when there's no one else, somebody's got to step in and get the job done. So it's going to be a stepped and a phased approach, but I'm hoping that by the fourth quarter we'll be there.
Yeah, and we've seen too that in terms of like projections, domestic travel is kind of going to continue and broaden, and then international will come, to speak to that international piece. So like Brian was saying, towards the end of the year, but it's definitely on people's minds. People are planning for international trips, and all the travel companies are following suit. So everyone's just trying to make sure that it can happen.
And as far as the airlines, as the passengers come back, more amenities will be brought on board for them. So it's going to be a trickling effect. And hopefully this time next year will be practically back to normal. I hope.
I know, we all hope. And I'll add one last note about Disney too. I mean, the cast members are really the heart and soul of Disney, which, not that we didn't appreciate it before, but you appreciate it even more. Like they really make it that magical experience that I talked about before. So, you know, obviously thousands and thousands were laid off, which was like devastating for the company. But it's nice to see that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Disney's starting to bring more people back. But I think what's almost more impressive is that for the cast members specifically, the ones who were able to keep jobs, they ended up like shuffling everybody to different positions, you know, kind of like was mentioned earlier, everybody has to pitch in, but they like flipped roles completely. And it was really impressive to see how great everybody just jumped in and, you know, kept it running and kept the magic alive there at the park. So yeah, it's, you know, exciting to see that. I think, you know, come October 1st, hopefully things will start to be back on track to a new normal. So. Okay, I think that is it. I know we have some closing words, but I just want to say thank you to all the panelists. This was a lot of fun, and it was really interesting hearing from all of you. So thank you for letting me be your moderator today.
Yeah. Thanks
Great.
for moderating,
Thank you so
Colleen.
much.
Great job, Colleen.
That was
Thank
nice.
Thank you to all the attendees. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to all of our subcommittee members who helped make this night possible. The insights we heard here were so great. And if anybody missed this or wants to share this with someone who did, we will be posting a recording on our YouTube channel later. So thank you, everyone, and hope to see you at our next event.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Catherine.
Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone.
See you guys.
Thank you. Take care.
Be safe.